So you've probably seen the headlines, right? Google potentially facing breakups, these huge antitrust rulings landing.
Oh, yeah. Definitely making waves.
It feels like this massive shift could be coming. Like the whole tech world might get redrawn.
It certainly seems that way on the surface.
But what's really interesting, and honestly a bit surprising from what we've been reading, is why so many marketers aren't exactly, celebrating this.
That's the core puzzle, isn't it? You have Google found to have illegally monopolized, well, both online search and the ad tech market.
Right. Big stuff.
And your first thought is, okay, the ad industry must be thrilled. More competition, right?
Yeah, you'd think.
But when you actually dig into the reports, look at what chief marketing officers are saying, or maybe not saying. It's a much more complicated picture.
Exactly. We're talking about these two major U.S. antitrust cases, one finding they monopolized search, the other one, their ad tech stack.
Landmark rulings, really.
And there's serious talk about remedies, things like forcing Google to actually sell off big assets, maybe Chrome, parts of their ad tech business.
Potentially huge changes.
You'd just assume that marketers and our sources say they're spending something like, $264 billion a year on Google properties?
A staggering number.
You'd assume they'd be eager for, a less concentrated market, maybe lower prices, more choice.
And logically, yeah, that makes sense. More competition could theoretically lead to better options, maybe drive down costs, perhaps even spark more innovation in advertising tech. But the insight from our sources is that the main push for these breakups, it's often coming from Google's direct competitors.
Okay.
We're talking about the demand-side platforms, the DSPs advertisers use to buy ads, the ad servers that deliver them, the supply-side platforms publishers use, those guys.
They're the ones who stand to gain the most directly if Google's ad tech power is reduced.
Precisely. They have the clearest incentive.
Right. So the pressure isn't necessarily bubbling up from the CMOs, the people actually signing off on those huge ad budgets. Their reaction seems, quiet, almost muted.
That's it. And the reason seems to boil down to one main thing: a perceived lack of viable alternatives that are just as good.
Really? Still?
Yeah. There was this quote from an industry insider that really nailed it, I thought. They said, "This is a drug people have become addicted to."
Wow. Strong words.
Breakup or no breakup, people keep spending in these places because there's a lack of real alternatives that deliver. It really gets to the heart of it.
So despite worries about Google's power, for many CMOs, it just works. Or at least it's seen as working better than anything else out there.
It seems that way. The sheer reach Google offers, access to potential customers, and crucially, the perceived effectiveness. It's incredibly hard to replicate that scale and that performance elsewhere, even if it's an illegal monopoly, if it delivers results.
That stickiness is powerful. It reminds me of that Rob Norman quote about advertisers actually quite liking this well-organized oligopoly.
Exactly. You've got Google, Meta, Amazon. These giants just dominate the ad spend landscape.
And it makes you wonder, even if Google is forced to break up, would those underlying dynamics just snap back into place? Would the money just flow to the next biggest players?
That's a really good question, because the reasons marketers use Google, the massive user base, the data insights, the integrated ecosystem, those things don't just disappear overnight if they sell off Chrome, for instance.
Yeah.
And we also have to layer in the current economic climate. CMOs have a lot on their plates right now.
Absolutely. Our sources were clear on that. They're worried about a potential recession, dealing with tariffs, geopolitical uncertainty is always buzzing around.
The eye rollbacks in some places.
Right. And maybe the most direct hit, advertising budget cuts are a real concern for many.
So against that backdrop, this whole Google breakup situation, which, let's be honest, could take years to actually play out with appeals and everything.
Yeah, it's not happening tomorrow.
It just understandably falls lower on their priority list. It's important, sure, but maybe not urgent compared to keeping the lights on next quarter.
That makes sense. You can see why there isn't widespread excitement if you're juggling all those other immediate fires.
Precisely. One consultant we read even suggested that for big company CMOs, this antitrust stuff often gets delegated. It's an issue for legal or the strategy team, perhaps not their day-to-day focus.
And there's probably an element of caution too, right? CMOs taking big public stances on controversial things can be tricky.
Definitely. It's a very delicate balancing act in the current corporate environment. Best not to stick your neck out unnecessarily sometimes.
Okay, so the reaction is muted, driven by a lack of alternatives and other priorities. But it's not like everyone is indifferent, right? There's some hope, some cautious optimism.
That's right. some marketers, some consultants are looking at this sustained antitrust pressure and hoping it might push Google to play nicer.
How's it?
The hope is that Google might feel it needs to be more transparent, about its data, how it's used.
Yeah.
And critically, maybe open up its systems more.
Interoperability.
Exactly. Making it easier for third-party tools to work within the Google ecosystem. Jerry D'Angelo put it nicely, saying there is a desire for interoperability to foster competition and independence to allow accountability.
Right. So if advertisers could more easily plug in their own tech, their preferred measurement tools, independently verify things,
it could naturally create a more competitive playing field, even without a formal breakup. And some sources suggested a Google facing more heat might be, less powerful in negotiating those huge ad deals.
less leverage.
Potentially. And Ariel Garcia raised another interesting point. Increased competition could actually raise the bar for the whole industry.
Like how?
Well, the idea is if Google, because it's so dominant, hasn't always had to be super strict on things like, say, know your customer requirements for publishers in its network, then maybe smaller, competing platforms might make that a priority. Invest in those standards as a way to stand out and build trust. So competition forces everyone to up their game.
That's an interesting angle. It feels like, okay, while the legal wheels are grinding super slowly, the market itself isn't standing still. We are seeing shifts. Competitors like OpenAI's ChatGPT, TikTok, even Amazon are making moves in areas Google used to own, like search and discovery.
That's a critical point. You look at eMarketer predicting Google's U.S. search ad market share might actually drop below 50% in 2025.
Wow, below half. That's huge.
It is, and it's driven partly by retail media, Amazon, Walmart, eBay offering search right where you buy stuff, but also new players in just general search are emerging.
So the competitive landscape is changing. Andrew Warner had a good take on this, saying Google will basically be forced to compete harder and evolve one way or another, perhaps faster than it would have done anyway.
Exactly. So this external pressure, separate from the antitrust cases, might be forcing Google's hand already.
The market might achieve some of what the regulators want just through competition.
It could. But then you circle back to why many marketers are still relatively okay with the status quo. Nikhil Lai observed that for all the talk, Google still provides what many see as peerless signals for efficient and effective media planning, buying, and optimization.
Peerless signals. That efficiency factor again, it's hard to walk away from that if it's delivering for your brand.
It's a very powerful draw. Hard to overestimate that.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. It seems like, yes, Google's facing these massive legal threats, potential breakup looming, but the marketing world isn't really cheering.
Right. The reaction is surprisingly muted.
And that's mainly because, one, there's this lack of clear, equally good alternatives that offer the same scale and perceived results.
That's the big one.
And two, CMOs are just juggling so many other urgent business worries right now, the economy, budget cuts, you name it.
Correct. The timing and the lack of alternatives really dampen the enthusiasm.
However, it's important for you listening to remember this isn't static. The constant regulatory pressure plus this growing market competition
Could still force significant changes in the long run, even if a big formal breakup gets stuck in appeals or doesn't happen quite as envisioned.
Yeah, the pressure itself might make Google adapt, maybe become more open, more transparent over time.
That's the hope for many, yes. The pressure cooker effect.
Which kind of leaves you with this final thought to chew on. What would truly disruptive innovation and real robust competition in search and ad tech actually look like, beyond just shuffling the deck chairs on the oligopoly?
And maybe more importantly, what would it finally take to make marketers actively seek out and embrace those alternatives, to really move away from the giants that dominate today?
Something to think about as this space keeps evolving.